afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest in the series of Smarter Marketer events. And we're really pleased to have a great panel line up for you today. And we are going to be focusing on how to maximize your marketing effectiveness. This is extremely topical, I think, for everybody. Having worked with B2B marketers over the last few years, it's a reoccurring theme and topic. How do you do more with less, whether that's less budget or less resource, and still meet your strategic business priorities? So, I wanted to welcome you all and introduce our panel. I'm Zoe, the Managing Director at Bright. We're a B2B marketing consultancy, and we specialise in helping marketers to deliver business value through the power of great work. So we really do focus on marketing effectiveness, and it's a topic that's really close to our heart. We really help marketers to show how they can deliver more to their businesses through improving the way they work, the tools and data they're using, and also work within their marketing teams and more widely into the organizations that they work for. So I'll hand over to Sian, who is one of the Bright team, so she can introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone. I'm Sian. I'm a director at Bright. I have been working with B2B companies over the last probably like 4 years or so, specifically around marketing effectiveness, and in particular the adoption of agile ways of working to support teams to be more effective, to drive efficiencies and streamline their ways of working, and ultimately help them to deliver value and achieve the goals that they are looking to achieve.
I'll jump in. I'm Emily Nichols. I'm the Group Marketing Director at Informa Markets. For those who don't know, Informa Markets is a B2B events organisation sitting underneath the wider Informa brand. And I look over 3 separate portfolios which have very different marketing effectiveness challenges, from everything from remote management to varying different types of budgets, some working in an agile way, some working in more traditional methods. So yeah, lots of interesting points for discussion today.
Thanks, Emily. I just want to remind everybody that we're really open to questions. So if you have anything that you want to ask, please drop it into the chat. We'll also be sharing some useful resources as we go along, so look out for those. And yeah, we just use the chat really to interact with us. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. So let's get into it. So let's start. The first question we've got today is, what are the big questions that B2B marketers should be asking around your marketing effectiveness? Emily, I'm going to hand that to you first, because I know you've got loads to talk about here.
Absolutely. I think for me, one of the things that I've seen done potentially not the right order in the past is we look internally first. And actually, my view would be we look at the entire end-to-end customer journey and see where our customers are falling out, and use that to decide where we focus our marketing effectiveness on first. And from there, kind of looking to see, okay, how do I get the most maybe out of my budgets? Do I have teams that are working to their optimum efficiency? Are they working in agile methods, if that's the right setup for that business, if they have the scale required for that? And finally, are there any old ways of working that we potentially need to give up? So one of the things I've seen happen a lot is we identify an area for improvement and for greater effectiveness, and we add on and on and on until our marketers are beyond stretched and unable to start thinking about what's coming next and look at things and analyse them to be as effective as possible. So I think to be hugely marketing effective, yes, we need to change, but we can't just keep changing and adding. We need to make sure we're getting rid of the old things, even if they are working, but just not working as well. That would be my first few questions to have a look at.
I think that's a really good intro, and that is a very good point around the customer focus, because often marketing effectiveness is thinking about efficiencies, but actually where you can be effective is very, very important. Sian, what's your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Emily was saying there. I think to sort of like take it a little bit out of the marketing context and think about it more from a team and a business context, it's also how the business and the organization sets the teams up for success and enables marketing effectiveness. And at Bright, you know, we've developed a sort of like marketing enablement wheel that covers everything from governance to leadership, culture and mindset, you know, the data and tools that you're using, you know, how you're embedding customer centricity, but all of these things play a role in terms of how you then drive marketing effectiveness. And obviously, Emily, you kind of touched on that briefly in terms of, you know, getting rid of some of the ways of working that aren't working, thinking about, you know, where you invest your time in terms of things that work better than others. You know, those are all things that also come into like habits, mindsets, the types of questions that we ask ourselves as individuals, as teams, as well as a business to kind of support that moving forward.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a really good point. Like being systematic as well is so important. And actually that brings up another question, which I think is interesting, is like, what does your business consider to be marketing effectiveness? Because actually, if you don't really understand the stakeholders who are putting that lens on this, then it can be quite challenging to meet their expectations. So it is important to understand the wider business context. When you're embarking on programs or projects that are focused around how are we going to make improvements and changes. And as Emily says, you do have to lose some things if you're going to be successful, because often, you know, marketers are overwhelmed and that's already causing them stress. So let's focus in on how your team can help improve your marketing effectiveness. So how can ways of working affect the results of your marketing? And I guess a good way to position that is really like, what holds teams back? And I don't know, Emily, if you've got some examples for us, but it'd be really interesting to hear like what in your experience is holding teams back from being effective and how maybe you've been able to empower them.
Absolutely. So for me, the biggest thing is around defining the roles and responsibilities of a marketer in our teams. So when I look at some of the analysis we've done around teams, not only the areas and skills that they feel they're missing or want to grow in, but also the areas that are causing them stress. Over 50% of what our marketers are doing at the moment, especially at particular levels, are around project management. And it's one of the areas we need to focus in on in our business, is how do we remove that project management element from our individual marketers' roles, so our marketers then become very focused on what they're outputting as opposed to the individual outcomes. And so in terms of kind of looking at how we can empower them to be more effective, I think more and more we need to think about the specialisms we put into teams. So having a project management specialism is a really important part of the marketing function. However, what we're expecting our marketers to do at the moment is to be a bit of a jack of all trades, to have that project management specialism, but also be a specialist digital marketer and a specialist email marketer and a specialist automation specialist, and copywriter, and so on and so on and so on. And I appreciate, obviously, in lean teams, this is really important. I'm actually not very pro overall centralization. Well, I think there's a massive place for central teams. I think that specialism in functions helps us become better as marketers. So I guess a long-winded way of saying, I think the first place we need to think about is redefining the value of each marketing role that we have within our functions. What's the outcome that we want from each of those marketing roles? And are the kind of roles and responsibilities that fall underneath each of those functions actually helping us get to that outcome, or are they just kind of tasks that need doing? If so, should we be finding a better home for them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we've certainly seen like a lot of data on the T-shaped marketer coming out over the last sort of 12 months, where you've got deep specialization, but we're still able to kind of cover a lot of generalist roles. And I think there's definitely some pros and cons, as you say, to that. That leads us on quite well, actually, to our next question, which is focused around important future skills for marketers so that they're more equipped to drive better results. And I think this is going to be a bit of a debate really around skills, as well as you alluded to, kind of like how your teams are running and where their roles and responsibilities sit in your operating model. Sian, what is your thoughts on the important future skills?
I mean, data definitely is going to be really important, not just in terms of sort of like the data that we already have, but I'm also kind of thinking about it in terms of we all, as marketers, we need to have a level of like understanding of data, how to sort of like manipulate, for want of a better word, or like use that data. I'm kind of thinking about as you start to head into sort of like AI territory, you know, where you're thinking about like the different models that you want to be using, you know, how you write instructions for those, you know, those are all skills that marketers are going to need to be able to learn to do, to be able to use those tools, use data, and use, I guess, some of the great things that are coming through around like different models that we can be trying to support our activity.
And are there any areas in marketing that you think, well, any areas that are holding the teams back or barriers?
From a skills perspective, I think the challenge that marketers have at this moment in time is time. It's the time to sort of think about the skills that they need. It's the time to go develop those skill sets, or, you know, bring in specialist skill sets, or work with third parties to kind of support and plug those gaps. I think it's just that you know, marketing at the moment is a little bit of a catch-all, and I think what Emily says about really thinking about the value of specific roles, the outcomes that you're looking for, is really important, and sort of respecting that, because if you then kind of move back into that habit of throwing everything over to marketing, they're going to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. And actually what we need to have is like marketing mastery, and to really think about what that means, and sort of like protecting that skill set and resource, and making sure that they are actually focusing on delivering that value.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So one of the areas that comes up a lot in the work we do is really about how culture plays into helping marketers to be more successful. So with that in mind, you know, thinking about growth culture and its impact on effectiveness, and we've seen, you know, some amazing results as companies move from a more fixed mindset to a more growth culture focus, as removing the fear of failure and empowering those teams. It'd be really good to kind of get your take, Emily, on how you can develop that growth culture and the mindset that helps to enable marketing effectiveness.
Absolutely. I think for me, the biggest thing is getting everyone on the same page first. So really clear defined OKRs to make sure everyone, no matter what their specialism, no matter what their function, are all headed in the right direction. I don't think that you can actually have a real growth mindset and go towards real growth if you're all going off in very different directions. And then I'd say it falls into a number of different buckets. The first is around actually setting up your team for success. You aren't able to allow your team to have a growth mindset if you don't have the right functions in place and you're not giving them the room to grow. The next is around trying to decide what model works for them. So the very kind of process element. So is it kind of working with in kind of agile methodology? Are there different routes that are maybe kind of more suited to your business? So defining exactly where your business's pain points are, and if that's the right route. And then the final part is around kind of technology and experimentation, making sure that your division has the right tools in place so that they can continually learn, innovate, kind of, I guess, reiterate what they're doing. And there's obviously underneath that bracket, see, everyone wants to be talking about AI at the moment, and I think it's really important that we see the real value that AI has in our future ways. And I completely agree with what Sian was just saying. I think AI has a role in what our marketers are going to be able to ask of it, and I think that's the biggest kind of growth skill that I would be saying to marketers to learn, is what questions do you need to ask to get the most out of it. But I think it's really important that we start to see AI as part of our overall tech stack, rather than this kind of catch-all of it's going to change our processes and the ways of exactly. It's not going to be able to be like that without proper use. You know, we wouldn't expect to jump on a CMS system and you know, straight away know how to do it and operate it in the best way, and you know, follow through and have the most beautiful singing or dancing, you know, website led by entire user experience. You would not expect somebody who has spent a side of desk half a day doing that, and nor should we be expecting that of AI.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's in our experience, you know, AI needs to be integrated into the processes and ways of working so that you're really maximising and amplifying its impact. And it is still quite baby steps. A lot of the products are immature. So I think, you know, there's a certain amount of test and learn that's still got to go on and prove the value of it. And actually, is it the solution, or is there other alternatives within your existing, as you say, martech? There's a lot of great functionality and automation available already. Sian, what do you think about the growth culture and day to day? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, culturally speaking, it's obviously incredibly important, and we need to be thinking about how we set teams up for success. But when you think about like the growth mindset, there's like the individual level, there's the team level, and then of course there's like how that cascades up towards the wider business, but also top down, I guess, from sort of like leadership to the junior team members. So, you know, some of this as well is like really how you're working with your teams and as individuals on some of the key characteristics, traits, values that need to be, you know, demonstrated day to day around the growth mindset. That openness to, you know, test and learn, and, you know, as part of that, not getting things right, and that being okay as a learning. That idea of kind of like failing forward faster sort of mentality is really, really important there. And yeah, giving people, you know, being open to people challenging, you know, being curious and celebrating when those things are happening. The more you celebrate it, the more people will do it. And I think it's also thinking about, you know, day to day, how you define that and what that means for you and your teams, but also then how you kind of take ownership and accountability for making sure that everyone is, you know, taking on that mindset, working in that way, demonstrating those values, and how you do that in a constructive, positive way as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think there's something in there as well about there's some certain amount of standardization, repeatability and reuse that marketing needs to really improve around. There's often a lot of pressure to produce new creative or new content. And many times you've already been through these cycles, and you have plenty of content and creatives that could be used for longer, let's say. And there's a lot of data around the wear out value on creatives is much longer than most marketers use their creatives for. And with content, of course, you've got the opportunity, you know, to take advantage of some of these tools within AI and you know, get help to repurpose, you know, and reuse some of the existing assets you already have. Aside from that, then playing into Sian's point around the way you work and the processes you follow, you know, are your teams working consistently? Do they understand their way that you go about certain types of activities or campaigns so that it's repeatable, and the lessons that you learn as you move through those cycles are shared and, you know, able to benefit the wider teams within your marketing group. So moves on to one of my hot topics, which comes up every time that we talk with senior marketers and indeed, you know, the senior leadership team in their businesses: alignment. So it's quite a big word, and I guess sales and marketing is often the place that it's most talked about. So let's, I guess, start with sales and marketing alignment. So Emily, what's your thought on the best way to achieve sales and marketing alignment?
So I have definitely been doing Sian's test and learn over a number of years on this. And actually, this has been kind of one of my biggest focuses over the last year. We have been looking at a big project across our EMEA business around essentially how can we improve our marketing generated revenue. And to start with, one of the things we identified was that our marketing qualified leads, our MQLs, were defined in completely different ways across the entire part of our business. So one person in sales team over in London might get a lead that we were calling marketing qualified, that somebody over in our Dubai team were getting, and it wasn't marketing qualified. So what we were doing is we were losing that trust partnership. There were leads coming through that were being called qualified that weren't necessarily qualified. And actually, it meant that the leads, when they came through, weren't actually kind of going on to convert, and we were losing that faith. So our first big step was creating a common definition of actually what was a marketing qualified lead once we handed that over. The next thing was to focus on, okay, how do we actually deliver leads that convert? One thing we noticed is we would set up campaigns, run them. We would have these going across to very lean sales teams of maybe 1 or 2 people, and suddenly we'd be flooding their lead queue with 100 new leads coming in. Now, it's impossible for them to follow up on 100 different leads at once. And so we were seeing leads that were unconverted. Now, this was obviously causing a lot of, I guess, then mistrust from our marketing team who were putting all this effort and seeing that the leads that they generated weren't getting followed through, and adding a lot of kind of stress on the pipeline for the sales teams. And so then what we were seeing is this kind of loop was breaking over and over and over again, because we weren't doing things in a, I guess, an automated way. We were doing these kind of big hit one-off campaigns. And so then it comes back to that loop and that constant transparency as we kind of have gone forward. So we've really kind of spent a lot of time talking, reiterating around the leads, and I think we're getting to a really good point. And what we've now led to is an entire visual across EMEA where everything is standardized. We're looking and surfacing some pretty key metrics around the number of days it's taking from sales, to opportunity, from opportunity to actually closing as a sale. We're seeing conversion percentages. And so now marketing has visibility on the end-to-end process, but so does leadership. So it's a big hot topic for me at the moment. I want to be able to sell by the number of phases that we're kind of looking at the moment. And I'd have to say there's so many opportunities now for more and more improvement, and there's obviously opportunities for more alignment. But every single stage, it's about building that trust partnership, asking the questions, not expecting to know the answers and the solutions straight away.
Yeah, that's a really good example, Emily. And so often the case that there's just a misunderstanding which creates that misalignment, because people are working to their own definitions, and it does come down to some of that that kind of common shared goals, but definitions around the pipeline are so important to make sure that you're able to have those kind of transparent conversations, as you say, on a trust basis, without getting drawn into, well, this wasn't how we would define it. And actually what you're trying to do is work towards your goal together. Sian, what's your experience in achieving this alignment?
I mean, I think that Emily's touched on some really good points, as have you, Zoe, just kind of in what you were saying. I think the big thing for me is really around that trust and transparency, because both sides have to be able to come together to sort of be open and frank about where things are going well and where things aren't going well, and having to take accountability and ownership for the roles that they play in that. If you don't have that, if you aren't, willing to sort of, I don't know, sort of get together and sort of unpack all of that previous, common terminology, disagreements, and, sort of come to the table willing and open to talk about all of those things, quite frankly, so that you can find the path forward, then your initiatives won't really work. So it is really starting with that sort of layer of trust and transparency, moving that forward. And then how you do that, obviously Emily and her team have done a lot from sort of tools and data and kind of thinking about their automation funnels, which is great. But there's obviously a lot of things that people can be doing within their existing martech stack, within their existing processes, to try to improve that transparency, sort of like the openness in terms of the data, that knowledge sharing, meeting cadences where the teams are coming together to talk openly about different things, etc., to move that dial forward.
Yeah, and it really is multifaceted. It's an area that I find really important in order to maintain that alignment with the strategic priorities as well. It's not just about aligning with sales. And actually an area that we're spending a lot more time focused on is RevOps, which might be a new term to some people, but it's like revenue operations is designed to align the revenue generating functions and teams. So not just sales and marketing, but really like taking a view that customer success or customer service, depending on how you define that in your organization, and partner alliances, all those teams that are working towards growing the revenue and acquiring customers, retaining, expansion, renewals, etc., are harmonized across their goals, targets, measures, the way they see data, and obviously that's like the dream, and people are working towards it. And we've got some really good examples of organizations now that have created a much stronger alignment through using that approach to get everyone focused on those goals. But I think in real terms day to day, and how it would work from bottom up is getting those definitions, those repeatable processes, all of those different aspects need to come together to make that work. So it's an aspirational goal to have those alignment pieces at the revenue generating level, but also you do need to kind of ground it into your teams so that they can to meet that target. And that moves us on actually really nicely to how do you set and manage OKRs and KPIs, which is an area that almost all the clients we work with have a lot of questions around, particularly making sure that those measures really do align to their business, but also that they demonstrate the value they're delivering, and that they're that we can talk about vanity metrics as well, I think, in this section. So Emily, I mean, how are you doing this at Informa? Because I think you have a lot of data that you're dealing with to support this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So how we're kind of working on this for 2024 is in a bit of a 3 tiers, because one of the things we realized is we were doing a lot of OKR setting just around our products and not enough around our people and our processes. So now we have a marketing EMEA OKRs that we've then taken to then pull into our kind of divisional marketing leadership OKRs with what then is relevant to then their products, and then their products have OKRs, and each of them feed into one. And I think this is our way of being able to make sure that the OKRs we're putting in our products are actually aligned with the leadership OKRs at the top. And all too often those things don't align, or we might have we might identify an OKR that we've put in as a leadership team at the top that actually in no way is going to reflect on those product OKRs, which are the most important ones for for actually the revenue generation side of our business. So we've really focused a lot on the people and process and leadership OKRs this year.
Okay. And Sian, from your point of view, obviously you see a lot of different approaches to this across our clients, and obviously it's an area we do spend a lot of time working with them on, particularly like thinking about those more agile ways of approaching this to maintain that alignment. What are your thoughts really on how you could best, I guess, what's best case for setting and managing these OKRs and KPI?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing is, first of all, like in terms of that alignment piece, it's making sure that everyone's got a really clear understanding of what the OKRs are for the business. Because, I work with a number of teams where, you'll start at the beginning of the year and there'll be a set number of targets, and then, it might get revised down, or, they change ever so slightly, or the strategic direction, slightly moves. And so what you tend to find is that teams are constantly sort of like reiterating and refining you know, their KPIs and the goals to kind of align to them. And sometimes that ends up resulting in actually a misalignment because, you know, particularly if you're in a business where that changes quite frequently, you know, not everyone can always be clear on what the actual OKR is of the day, for example. So I think there's one thing in terms of just like being, you know, really thinking about how you set your OKRs and then how you communicate them to make sure that there's that shared understanding. Because then as teams, they can really start to think about what that means in terms of the OKRs, the KPIs and the goals that they need to set that align back into those sort of like business goals. And you can kind of take that layer by layer down, you know, as a marketing team, you can kind of think about that in terms of your annual, what does that mean in terms of the 6 months, you know, specific programs and projects. And then if we're kind of taking this into agile terminology, you know, how that then feeds down into specifically, you know, what you're doing at your sprint level, or even what that means, what you're doing day to day in terms of channels, experiments that you're running, to really be thinking about, okay, well, each of the measures of success that we're putting in at our tactic levels will all feed back into those program goals that then feed back up into the initiatives and the annuals, etc., etc. So it's really kind of sort of that top down, as well as then sort of like making sure that alignment's happening even at the tactical channel level, activity level. And of course, there will be times where there are, to Emily's point, KPIs and measures that you're putting in that don't necessarily have anything to do with, you know, what the business is doing as a whole, and then more for measures of like how you're progressing against, you know, against some of those bigger OKRs and KPIs. But it's really kind of getting quite strategic and not measuring for measuring's sake, but really thinking about what it is that you're measuring, the why you're measuring it, and how it's going to support what it is that you're doing overall, whether that is demonstrating progress, you know, overall targets and results, etc., etc.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, there's a lot to think about with OKRs and KPIs, and I think that it's an area that marketers sometimes struggle with. So I think we can definitely share some of our content after this as well, if anyone wants to get a bit more detail into that. And I guess that leads us on to the other topic, which is very hot right now, which is tech and AI. So I guess it's a question of what should you be asking, what questions should be asking to maximize the value of your existing martech, and how can you empower your teams when they're thinking about adopting, you know, these newer tools such as GenAI, etc. Emily, I know that you're Informa, you mentioned at the beginning that you and Informa were tackling this, so it'd be good to hear a bit more about how that's going and what you've learned.
Absolutely. Now, I've only got examples from in my team, but one of the things that we've had a look at is obviously doing a lot of AI testing, starting pretty light, starting with content AI testing. And we, in the beginning, saw that actually any of our kind of wholly human created content was performing much stronger. We're actually starting to see a few cases of where AI subject lines, as an example, are kind of taking the lead in the results. And the big thing that we've shifted and changed is using the AI that sits within our existing martech stack. So in the beginning, we were using things like ChatGPT to create subject lines, which obviously isn't learning from your product and from the results that you're creating. We then used our Eloqua automation system to generate subject lines through AI. And that's where we've seen that we've had uplift in every single area over the last few weeks where we've been doing these tests through Eloqua. And I think for me, that's just such a good example of how we have these huge technology stacks. And even for those people who don't necessarily have like the complexities of a full-scale automation system, I would say when I look at the tech stack that we have, we potentially don't use 50% of the tools that are available to us within that tech stack already, and we keep adding on tools and tools and tools. And I guess this comes back to the point earlier of we add and we don't necessarily kind of consider what we might already have to take advantage of in potentially a slightly different way. So I think it's about really looking to see how we can get a bit smarter with the tools we have already and seeing what capabilities they're building, because it's undoubtedly going to be very much, if it's at the forefront of our minds as marketers, it's very much at the forefront of those technology providers' minds about building AI capabilities into your existing tech stack. So I would have a look, work with your technology partners as well, to really push them for what features they're bringing up that might be able to help your teams advance on AI quicker without having to add additional functionality and additional complexity to what your teams are trying to achieve.
Yeah, thank you. Sian, any thoughts on AI activation from what we've learned working with our clients?
Yeah, I think it will be, for me, when it comes to AI activation, it's probably, there's a couple of things that businesses need to be thinking about. There's obviously sort of like where they want to start experimenting, and so starting small and using that sort of like test learn approach. I also think that there's another lens in terms of the risk profile relating to AI. So it's also getting teams to really think about what are some of the safeguards and guardrails that they want to put in place around utilization of AI, so that, you know, when you are giving teams the green light to test AI tools and how they might be working, you know, you're giving them some really clear parameters within which to test around, but also as a business, you have some confidence and some control over how it's being utilized, and, you know, you're minimizing the impact of any, you know, reputational impact, you know, that can happen with AI, for example, where you know, things may come across as like less authentic, or, you know, we've all been there where we've seen, you know, comms that are clearly written by something like ChatGPT and things like that. So, you know, there's a little bit of a balance in terms of, as a business, you kind of have to give people the opportunity to test AI because they're probably using it already anyway. So, you know, giving people a little bit of, you know, like leeway with it, but make sure that you've got some controls so that you can rein it in and manage it effectively. And so kind of thinking about how you can have like an activation framework could be a really useful way to kind of get that alignment and, you know, a little bit of control and confidence in terms of how you're adopting AI. And I think I agree with Emily in terms of, I know you were talking more widely, but also speak to your martech providers. You know, they're thinking about how they're incorporating AI into their tools. They're all, you know, they're doing a lot their side in terms of the adoption of AI, and I bet they'll have a few things that they can share and a few thoughts in terms of some great use cases, places to get started with utilizing AI as kind of like your starting point.
Yeah, I think you're right. And don't forget to tap into the knowledge within your teams, because lots of different AI experiments are happening across these businesses, particularly businesses like the scale of Informa or some of our other corporate large clients. You know, there's pockets of testing happening, and making sure that that is being shared is really, really important, actually. And we've got some great stories as well we can share around kind of how we've been testing AI with clients, drawing their kind of transformation around, you know, changing the way they work to be more effective as well. So yeah, I think AI needs to be part of the fabric of what we do and not the thing we do. So we've got to remember that. We've got a couple of questions, and I know we're kind of coming up against time, so I'm going to kind of pull out some of those to, if we could do a couple of short answers. So one of the questions that's come in is around, how do you think you can overcome a lack of trust in data that's owned outside of marketing, so e.g. sales data, so you can be confident when you're reporting? So it's a kind of interesting one, really, like kind of part of that alignment piece. Emily, is that something you've had any experience with at Informa?
So the way I'm hearing the question is, it's not about, is it about the sales data, a lack of trust in the end sales data, or is it a lack of trust in the marketing data that sales are getting? Because from a sales data perspective, I mean, the actual end revenue figures is not something that I've ever seen as kind of, there's a lack of visibility on end revenue from sales. What I've seen is that there's maybe that data gap between kind of the marketing efforts to sales data. But I have to say, it's not something that I've come up against, that sales data has any mistrust from marketing. We work in a very kind of, we're publicly listed, so obviously all of our revenue data is very much validated, so not something that I can speak to, maybe something that Sian has heard from some of the marketers she's worked with.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that, Emily, for you guys, there's probably a level of confidence because you do have shareholders and the market that you've got to like report back to and things like that as well. I do think for me there's like two lenses to this, because obviously if you are using things like Salesforce, HubSpot, tools and technology like that, then you're kind of taking away some of the mistrust, because some of that is in the technology and and that side of things. I do think, however, one of the things that we do have to talk about is how well some of those systems are being used. And I have definitely got clients, I've definitely worked in teams where usage of Salesforce isn't as robust, or it's not something that they do daily. It's not a habit that they're adopting, and so I think the way that I have tackled that, and I'm not saying that this is for everyone, but this is my personal preference, is I think you have to take the data that you have at face value. If people then have something against it, what that tells me is that their either use of the systems that feed into that data or the way that they are inputting that data is not accurate. And so therefore it's not about the data that you have, it's about the data that's being input. And those are the areas that you need to focus in on in terms of improving that, so that you have more accurate, more robust data sets that you're using. But you almost have to take your, whether it's Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever it is, you have to take that as the single source of truth. And if there are discrepancies, it's diving into those and sort of like understanding where those discrepancies or the root cause of those discrepancies are coming through and fixing those to build confidence and trust over time. Because if you can't trust the data, then it's like, where do you start? So you almost have to start as your baseline, and through those open conversations start to sort of like rebuild that trust and use it from there, but almost say, this is our starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it is difficult sometimes if you feel like it's undermining what you're trying to illustrate. So there definitely needs to be that open conversation around the way that those systems and tools are used, to make sure the data is accurate. As you say, it's all about accuracy at the end of the day.
And sometimes I was going to say, my final little point on that is sometimes it's also just knowing where the gaps are and talking openly about that. Because that's also a great starting point, like know what you have in your data, but also know what your data is missing, because that is at least you're being transparent in terms of the data that you have and the data that you don't have, and again use that as a starting point to fill in those gaps.
Yeah, great point. So we're up against time. Final 30 seconds. Could you both give me in one sentence a tip for how marketing leaders can get started on improving marketing effectiveness? Emily?
Sure. Map out your process first. Map out your customer process and your internal process and see where you think things are breaking. See where they don't align with each other. See if there's a particular part of your customer journey that is breaking. So, for example, I don't know, you're getting loads of people into, this is not one sentence, which is very normal. The example, you're getting loads of people into your website, but they're not converting through. And then see in your team how your skill sets align. Do you have an optimization manager? If not, that's where you're missing out on your effectiveness. So find your customer problems and decide what your internal processes need to be so that you can solve them.
Thank you. Great one. Sian?
Yeah, I mean, I think leading on from what Emily's saying, once you've identified some of those things, I would probably say start small and think about where the quick wins are, because when you're talking about marketing effectiveness, we're also talking about change, and change is hard. So find the easy wins and use that to kind of like build confidence, celebrate those successes, and then, scale it up from there and test and learn. You know, everything in marketing is an experiment in some ways. We know some things, to Emily's point, work better than others, but you are always learning something, and it's about how you take those learnings and build on them moving forward.
Absolutely. I'd like to add actually a very quick thing. I know I said about hiring an optimization manager. I'm aware that most marketers teams are really lean and we budget 2 years ahead. So if you can't hire, look at your skill sets in your team and think, okay, actually, is it worth, you know, sending one of my 2 marketers in my team on a one-day optimization course and making sure that they give up some of the other things they're working on to make sure that this is prioritized in their task list. So it's not always about hiring and bringing in new roles.
Yeah,
a great final point. And yeah, for me, it's always about that revenue generating alignment, making sure everyone's got common goals so that you can make those steps towards them, and change how you're working in order to make sure that you are able to test and learn and experiment successfully in order to show results. And we're over time, so it just leaves me to say thank you to everyone that's joined us today, and the questions we've had. Has been some great stuff on the chat, so we will definitely make sure we put out responses to anything we haven't covered. It's such a big topic. I think there's been some really great themes that have come up. We haven't even touched on creativity or branding within this discussion, so still some areas that we'd love to carry on and cover in a future event. And thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences and what you have achieved with the great work you're doing at Informa. And thanks to Sian as well for sharing some of the work we've been doing with our clients and how that's giving them some really great results. So thank you very much and have a really good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.